Hello and welcome to Mindscapes, our series of conversations with men and women whose ideas, visions and philosophy define our contemporary world. My guest today has been a distinguished bureaucrat. He holds a doctorate in social anthropology. He was educated at the universities of Cuttack, Allahabad, and has held fellowships at Cambridge and Harvard. But above all, he's one of modern Indian poetry's preeminent voices. His work has a pessimistic, metaphysical aura to it, and yet, despite its intense lyricism, is firmly grounded in the reality. The sacred and the profane work harmoniously together in his work. I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Sitakant Mahapatra. Dr. Mahapatra, you have won the Gyanpith Award. You have been widely honored as a poet, and yet your professional career has been that of a bureaucrat. And somehow the bureaucracy seems a fairly prosaic domain compared to the sort of, the lyricism, the intensity, the sensitivity that poetry demands. How have you reconciled the two?
Oh, well, this is a question that I have faced myself and several times also asked myself. Now, I would put it this way, that for a poet, even though the project work of the day-to-day quotidian in the offices, different offices, right from the beginning as a deputy commissioner to a secretary to Government of India, but if a man is sensitive and keeps his eyes and ears open, I believe for a creative writer, all experience is valuable as well as valid. When you see a thing on paper, if you don't look at it purely as a dead issue, but try to imagine where you are handling someone's case, there is a man behind a particular issue, then you gain another insight. And throughout my career, I have tried to develop that.
How does one bring an artistic sensibility, a sensitivity again I say, into your work as a bureaucrat?
The public theme to which you are exposed as a bureaucrat also leaves its ripples. And in my poetry, always the protagonist, the poetic self, is a very withdrawn, internalized person. But what he internalizes is not purely his own emotions, but also he tries to also open the windows of his, it's not a closed monad of the self, but through the open windows you also get all people who are standing before the queue, in a queue before a ration shop or a procession going. In other words, whatever is happening in the world outside, not merely the clouds or the birds as it used to in the romantic poetry, those also you internalize and give it an intensity. Only you don't speak about them from the in tune of what a political ideology or economic terminology should be a rhetoric or a slogan. You internalize in such a way that through your words it becomes a human concern, whether it is poverty, whether it is all the public issues that we are facing in this country. They have, I must say, in more than one way entered into my poetry all through in these 40 years of my writing, as much as I have meditated on my own confrontation with reality, its problems of existence, of life and love, of death. These public themes have also an equal place, and I think they have shaped my sensibility that way. I have never closed myself to this side, and in addition, the opportunity I got to work among tribal societies, that has been also a very great benefit, because here were people who tucked away in hills and jungles, some of the most deprived.
Now the tribals have traditionally been, in terms of our contemporary urban jargon, are frequently considered backward. In what ways would you sum up the creativity of a people traditionally regarded as backward?
What has always enchanted me is the kind of sense of community. The whole village is one, which doesn't happen in an urban setting. if a person is poor, he doesn't go without a meal if the whole village will look after him. That sense of community, and more than that, that deep attachment to life.
In what ways does this sense of community, this harmony with nature and the environment and the cycles of time and life, to what degree does this find expression in art in a manner that seems obviously comprehensible to us outside those communities?
You see, they are oral poetry, of which I have edited several anthologies, and now a definitive anthology is going to be published by end of the year under the UNESCO collection of representative works called They Sing Life. They are oral poetry, they are mural paintings on the walls. Not all the communities, but a number of communities. It is excellent as paintings. And their song and dance traditions. These are some of the most fascinating things. It's not only C.M. Baura who ages ago edited primitive songs from different climes, including the African Bushmen or Australians. I pity that in India we still haven't tried enough to document this oral tradition of the tribals in different parts of India. Their song traditions, their legends, their folk tales, which on one side is a rich mosaic of a part of our Indian culture. On the other side, there is a crying need that they also share in the national cake. Their deprivation ends, there is more of social justice, that the development efforts not only trickles down but become participants.
Apart from studying the tribes, you as a social anthropologist are a student of anthropology, of society, and the processes of societal evolution. How do you respond to the debate? What is the balance? Do we make the tribes forward because we have labeled them backward? What is the balance that we, from the outside, claiming development, can make available to people who are in tribes?
In fact, on this also, within the tribal communities, between the older generation and the new, between the illiterates and those who have got now the benefits of education, come to colleges as teachers or to legislatures and parliament, there is a debate. What exactly is the core of our tribal way of life, our civilized? What can stay and what can be given away as peripheral, or even part of the, some of the false impressions, some of the taboos which are not essential to it. This is going on. And moreover, what exactly is the problem of this society is, once I commented upon it, the moral basis of a backward society is this, that they can combine very well for social and cultural purposes. These songs, dances and all numbers. They just cannot combine when it comes to political and economic purposes. And most tribals feel that modern political ideology is splitting them. Once a person told me that we are at one time the whole village was Santhal. Now I am a communist Santhal, he is a Congress Santhal and all that. So the balance should be how we can retain some of these values to which I referred earlier, values which are universal in their significance, and perhaps do away with the few things that is not very essential. In fact, culture change is such a thing that this society are inevitably changing, and I am sure that quite a few things will not remain as they were before, but to the extent possible it would be in the interest of this multicultural society to retain as a part of this vast mosaic of our culture whatever is very valuable in terms of their performing, literary and visual arts, but and their way of life.
You have also been a senior bureaucrat looking after education and culture. How does one protect and preserve these? By isolating them, by preserving them at Republic Day parades where we have these sort of little windows on what's happening? How do we preserve, simultaneous to this massive cultural invasion, in a sense, from Western media, how do we preserve these intrinsic elements of our varied heritage?
In fact, this is only a kind of a symbolic way and perhaps a superficial way of projecting their lifestyle. To treat as if it is a part of a museum thing. And about museum, this is what a great authority said, that in museums we try to depict a way of life which we ourselves have made impossible. In other words, our attempt should be to see that these societies, these ways of life survive and grow as they are, but with the benefits of economic growth and development flowing in. As I said, part of the society is bound to change. Culture is not a static thing. It should be no one's point that they should remain as deprived, as poor, tucked away in hills and dales, and to be only subjects of study for the civilized chaps from the cities. It should never happen.
Dr. Mahapatra, do you think that, despite the advent of television, you're a man of words, that the literary traditions have a place, will survive? In the very nature of television, and modern television at that, that our attention spans are diminishing.
Yes.
And we're getting sort of instant gratification by a succession of images which
yes.
have already been visualized for us in a sense.
Exactly.
So we're becoming intellectually lazy.
That's right.
And in terms of almost the demands of poetry, do you think in that way that somehow the nature of art, of sensibility will change?
It is antithetic that way, because creative literature always, one of its major purposes is to enrich and irrigate the human imagination. And human imagination at the beginning of this millennium is perhaps the most endangered, because we are trying to leave nothing to imagination. The audiovisual, the advertising techniques that don't imagine, don't think. We have done all the thinking for you. Now this danger, the books are certainly an antidote to it, and I feel that till dreams and visions, till man is capable of dreaming, I think there will still be a space for books, because books at their best enshrine a writer's, a creative author's vision of reality. He tries to tell the readers what he has done, what he has tried to say, and it becomes a kind of it becomes a challenge to his imagination.
Also the readers, because the reader picks up the resonances from his own experience, his own...
That's right. He relives the experience. What he has gone through, perhaps he recreates part of it. As I said, a really good reader, and most good readers, they relate a creative writer's work to something in their own experiential context. And that doesn't require much of cognition, because it is at the emotive level.
In some ways, in your external engaging with the world, in terms of your profession, your interests, it's been your work in different levels of the bureaucracy in government, in Orissa, in the center, your work with the tribals, but obviously the sort of the inner you of Dr. Mahapatra has really been a poet. What is it about poetry that you find meaningful, that you find substantive? Is it a process of catharsis, that you have emotions and insights and responses that you want to express? Do you see a social purpose to it? Why do you write poetry?
I would put it this way, that whether it is the job I took, that is the civil service, in fact there is a tale to it, because mine had been a generation of teachers. And when my father was 80 and I had joined the IAS, he said that, okay, they say that times are changing, you have done so well, you are number one in your batch, but see that you don't become illiterate. Now this is what the profession I chose, or professionally being a social anthropologist, they remain only as profession. My passion is poetry. I would put that on a much higher level. It is this passion that has always lighted up my inner self, and has not given a secondary place to the others, but everything else has become some kind of subserving the main aim of my poetic self. And in that also I have, even though I have written on literature, social anthropology. I have taken sabbatical many times and taught in the universities of Harvard and Cambridge. I have continued to write poetry only in my mother tongue, because I believe that you can write poetry only in the language in which you dream, and for that language is for me Oriya. So, but I have been very lucky in these translations. I have continued to write in Oriya, but there have been friends like Sitakant Mahapatra from my state who knows Oriya, and a first-rate poet writing in Indo-Anglian, as they call it. He has translated me. Bikram Das, who translated Paraja, he has translated me. And when it has gone to other European languages, because it's now 8 or 9 European languages, there are anthologies, I was very lucky that a German professor who has a fairly good knowledge of Oriya by several years working, he did it into German. Similarly,
when poetry gets translated, there are many elements to poetry. Obviously, there is the sort of the element of the ideas that you make pristine and communicate. But there's also sort of the use of the language itself. Do you ever feel frustrated that the cadences, the alliteration, the many aspects of language are lost in translation?
Quite a bit is lost. I'm deeply aware of it, that poetry is such a sensitivity and the more innermost language of the soul, that in translation, and that too if it happens to be translation at a second level via another language, quite a bit. The music is lost to start with, and so many other things lost. In fact, someone has said that poetry is that which is untranslatable, but that would be a tragedy, because some of the best poets are also available to us in fairly good translation, just as some are said to be major poets. Ask any Russian, he would say that Pushkin is the greatest poet. I have looked at almost all the versions of Pushkin's translation, and none of them, I must admit,
do you sometimes feel
that
the translator has added a nuance or a cadence that you hadn't thought of or you hadn't intended, and he has read something in there that is added value in a sense?
In fact, this is the problem for any sincere translator: fidelity to the original, and also trying to convey the language and the thought processes into another language. It's not very easy. Actually, there is a story about it which I once narrated. It was about a king who had gone out hunting in the forest. On a riverside he heard a beautiful bird singing. Back in his palace he wanted the bird to be brought in. It was brought, but it didn't sing. Someone said that perhaps you have to bring the tree on which it perched. They brought the tree. Even then it didn't sing. Someone said the river, bring the river here. Bring the landscape. Then the king gave it up. What I mean is that the soul of poetry is, which is the bird singing, is perhaps in the entire cultural milieu in which there is so much of cultural baggage, music in the original, that you can't take up through abstract counters of word for word. Then thesaurus and dictionary would do. So someone who is a poet perhaps work in liaison either with the poet or another language, and with love tries to convey it, then it can come out. There have been successful translations, but there have been also awful translations.
Tell me, for you in the process of creating poetry, what is the magic moment? What is the high? Is it sort of when idea takes form into words and translates onto paper, when the poetry is complete and you present it to an audience, you read it, or where do you get your sort of ecstasy, the moment of release? And
sometimes it has been what I should call it can be an event, it can be a person I have made, it could be also a landscape, something which has created some kind of a trauma inside me, and then finding the appropriate words. Quite often I have written down a short poem almost as if it is in a trance in a half an hour. After that, there have also been on the other side experience when I have written down a first line, maybe a stanza, left it there, come back to it after 6 months or a year, and then thought over that matter, gone inside, searched for what I was trying to say and then completed it. Because for me, poetry has been not only the innermost statement of the soul, it is also not something which you take several images and try to decorate the drawing room of your poem. It's not that way. Their language and the substance merge inexorably and unobtrusively into each other, so that what you say and how you say it, they become inseparable from each other. And in this process, the search for the proper language, the most intense language, so that, because I think in a good poem, every word should speak. There could be words which I do revise my poems a lot. I try to quote cert. Even sometimes I have thrown away poems which I feel haven't said not an iota of what I have said, and yet the feeling remains that what you want to say finally perhaps will not be ever said. That perhaps gives me the kind of hope that the best that I can write is yet to come. That is the feeling one is left with.
You mentioned you use the word trauma, sort of the trauma of a landscape. Why the word trauma? Is sort of anguish, conflict, something discordant in some ways necessary to trigger the poetic impulse?
It is. It is a kind of a feeling of that you are as if a man possessed. You are not quite in synergy with the near and dear ones, and you are sipping, let's say, a cup of tea with your wife, and then you are suddenly feeling as if she is a distant star and she isn't there. Somewhere you feel that when the poem is growing within you, and it takes time to grow, when it is growing within you, that period, there have been several ways of looking at it, but one way is certainly that there is a feeling of restlessness till you have properly sized of your own emotion, given it an architecture of words, given them the kind of music which you think that it should come through in the poem. Because I believe that lyricism, they have said that just as there is a metaphysical pessimism in his poetry, there is a lyricism.
Intense lyricism, yes.
Yes, and that in certain other poems also I have taken some of the traditional epics and myths and given them a modern context. 3 such poems, for example, which have been very much discussed and translated into many of the European languages, and I am very happy that they have been understood there. A poem on Yashoda, a poem on Kupja, the hunchbacked woman who was transformed by Krishna's magic touch, and a poem on Jara, the primitive hunter who mistakenly killed Krishna. Now Yashoda, looking into Krishna's mouth, the infant Krishna's mouth, seeing the stars and planets, telling this to the cowherd maidens, who said that you must be mad. This, I thought, is a metaphor for all persons, including creative artists, who perhaps see another vision of reality, which is then the known reality never remains the same. You become a man possessed. Just as the hunchback woman the cursed woman getting transformed by the magic touch of Krishna in the streets of Mathura and Kansa, it was the mythical moment of transformation, that when you open the corridor to your inner self and not just wearing a mask.
Doesn't that call for a poet to have substantial courage, to open the inner corridor of his heart, to lift the veils of the external forms that we always put on?
In fact, I once wrote about it that for a poet it is not purely a vision that he must have. The most important thing in creative work, and that and poetry particularly, is the courage. And that courage and the sense of wonder which a child has, it comes from that sense which only a child possesses. In that story where the king was going without clothes, all his parishads and everybody, nobody said anything until a small child pointed a finger at the king and said, "Oh king, where are your clothes?" That, I think, that courage which comes from innocence as well as vision which the child, and I believe that a creative writer is one in whom this child is alive, and he is creative till the child, his hopes, his visions, his sense of wonder in the sense that every sunrise is another new sunrise, not a quotidian. We tend to feel that we have seen it.
In some ways, we all wear clothes. What would you like? What would be your hope that people, in looking at you, in reading your work, how would you like them to describe you?
In fact, I feel that the most satisfying occasions have been when a reader, whom I just don't know from somewhere in the interior, has so much identified with what I have said in a poem that he writes back saying that as if I felt it, as if this is my experience. Because I feel that all human beings are basically, there is a poet inside everyone. Who hasn't felt the way a poet feels with the death of a father, or when he loves a child, his own children? Only the poet is lucky that he uses words. But for me it has always been an attempt to hold up that mirror to the readers, that this is the picture of our human condition, all our grandeur, all our defeats, all our hopes. And I have always tried to refuse to take a pedestal that I am speaking to, because in my view good poetry never aspires to teach or to be didactic, to share, so that we are less lonely, more together, so that we build that images of feeling together. That is what I think is the basic inspiration in my poetry.
If you were on the proverbial desert island and were allowed to take one book with you, what would it be?
I'll take a Milan Kundera book, and it would be Infinity, his one of his latest. And one other book which I have always enjoyed reading is Albert Camus' Plague, to which I have gone back time and again. The doctor trying to save human lives when the North Algerian town is struck by plague, and a Father Penelou who says that, well, this is a visitation from God because of the growing irreligious temperament everywhere. The father is invited by the doctor to the death of a 4-year child. His death throes, only 2 minutes it lasts, he dies. And then the father says, shakes hands with the doctor and says, now I have gone through something which even Jesus Christ cannot separate us. Then the father had seen that Christianity doesn't matter. What is important is a human life. That is one of my books I tremendously admire. Perhaps I would take that and 1 or 2 books of Milan Kundera or Marquez. Marquez also is, these 3 as fiction writers are very intimate to my soul. And poetry, I would carry a volume of Pablo Neruda, Residencia and Terre, that is the Residence on Earth.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mahapatra. That's been great. Has been that of a bureaucrat, and somehow the bureaucracy seems a fairly prosaic domain compared to the sort of, the lyricism, the intensity, the sensitivity that poetry demands. How have you reconciled the two?
Oh, well, this is a question that I have faced myself and several times also asked myself. Now, I would put it this way, that for a poet, even though the project work of the day-to-day quotidian in the offices, different offices, right from the beginning as a deputy commissioner to a
Hello and welcome to Mindscapes, our series of conversations with men and women whose ideas, visions and philosophy define our contemporary world. My guest today has been a distinguished bureaucrat. He holds a doctorate to your work as a bureaucrat.
No, the public theme to which you are exposed as a bureaucrat also leaves its ripples. And in my poetry, always the protagonist, the poetic self, is a very withdrawn, internalized person. But what he internalizes is not purely his own emotions, but also he tries to also open the windows of his. It's not a closed monad of the self, but through the open windows, you also get all people who are standing before the executive government of India. But if a man is sensitive and keeps his eyes and ears open, I believe for a creative writer, all experience is valuable as well as valid. When you see a thing on paper, if you don't look at it purely as a dead issue, but try to imagine where you are handling someone's case, there is a man behind a particular issue, then you gain another insight. And throughout my career, I have tried to develop that.
How does one bring an artistic sensibility, a sensitivity again I say, into social anthropology? He was educated at the universities of Cuttack, Allahabad, and has held fellowships at Cambridge and Harvard. But above all, he's one of modern Indian poetry's preeminent voices. His work has a pessimistic, metaphysical aura to it, and yet, despite its intense lyricism, is firmly grounded in reality. The sacred and the profane work harmoniously together in his work. I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Sitakant Mahapatra. Dr. Mahapatra, you have won the Gyanpith Award. You have been widely honored as a poet, and yet your professional career